OSLC Connect for Jira training. I'm Robert Balarjan. Here's one of our user training sessions around linking. Our session target today is creating links with OSLC Connect for Jira and specifically operating within global configurations. The reason why it's important for us to take a look at this is global configurations operate a bit different than standard linking that we might have with OSLC Connect for Jira. And we want to be able to give more guidance on how to create, navigate, show, discover these links in these different environments, and some special focus on OSLC linking and configuration linking in general. We know, as we talked about the other sessions, that OSLC has specific domains and link types that they create and define, which is important for the standard and how these different requirements and change tools, for example, interact with each other. But we also have another overlay on here, which is when we're working with configurations, we only store the links in a single endpoint, meaning that as we operate with creating links from Jira to DOORS Next, or in fact even when I create a link from DOORS Next to Jira, there's only going to be one endpoint, one repository that will hold the link, and the other repository will actually perform a discovery or a query to be able to identify what incoming links might be referring to that artifact in that configuration. And what we want to do in this session is give you some more knowledge about that, give some demonstrable evidence to that, so as you're operating in the system as a user, you understand what's happening, what's occurring. The nice thing about this, there can be some complexity about link ownership across the standard. Some domains own some links and not others. The nice thing about when we're dealing with change resources like we have with Jira, you can nominally understand that Jira is actually going to own all link information because they're workflow artifacts. That's where we store the link. All the asset artifacts, that items that have versions, are actually going to do a discovery to find out if in that configuration there's a link coming into them, and we'll walk you through how that happens. Links are discovered in one of two ways in the IBM ELM environment. The primary way that we'll see and we'll focus on today is using LDX, link discovery mechanism, which is an indexer that's reading information from the Jira TRS feed to know what links might be there and what information has changed about those links. That is the primary way that almost all links are discovered. There are a couple key situations where there's something called OSLC query that's being performed, and we'll show that nominally around DNG change sets so you understand how those operate and how those work. We'll show a bit about how links operate when we're moving between different GCs and show some of the value around that. And take a look at a few special situations, things that you should be aware of when using GCs and using links and what happens. And then we'll actually spend some time looking at some of the tools that we have within OSLC Connect for Jira that helps both users that are just starting to use GCs as well as experienced people that want to just understand better why a link might be occurring in a certain place and why I'm navigating to a particular GC. Those are available to be able to understand more. Now, as you've seen in most of our training sessions, these are mostly live demos. We'll do that again here. What you'll see here is probably a little bit more broken up sections in here. Utilizing GC requires a bit more setup sometimes, as well as their complex scenarios. So running a straight 20 or 30-minute demo is a bit more difficult to be able to do streamlined and as efficient as possible. So you'll see some sections that are broken up here. So appreciate your time, and let's get on to using GCs with Jira. When working with Jira and configurations, the first thing we need to pay attention to is actually our project settings. The way that we've mapped Jira to global configurations is actually pretty straightforward and uses a base configuration that we have within Jira. So in Jira, whenever I'm operating, whenever I'm working, I'm always going to focus on specific versions. These are the targets for my release. They are the targets for what issues I might have discovered, my defects, where I found things, and where I plan to put things. And so this is actually the basis for us to do configurations between Jira and the IBM ELM world. You'll see down here in the global configurations, this is something your project admin will set up, but it gives you a sense of what we're actually operating with. Two things that relate to OSLC and configurations. The first being the link version field mapping. So what this is doing is it describes, these are my different OSLC link types, and this is the version field from Jira that I might be using. The best way I can think of explaining this is something like implements requirement. That's looking at the fixed version because we're looking at a future release that we're planning to do work for. Something like effects requirement, I'm going to use the effects version field because I'm looking at a past release in which I actually found an issue or had an issue that was affected by a particular requirement, and I'm going to point backwards. There are basic default settings of these values, but depending on your own process, you might change which version field that you might want to use. So there is a small slight configuration here. For the most part, these stay pretty stable. What's most important with your teams is looking at this global configuration to release mapping. So your project admin, your configuration manager is going to be focusing on this, which is to say, when I'm working on a particular release, which global configuration do I want to use? And so what this does, it allows you to be able to say, when I'm navigating from a Jira issue that's targeted for release 2.0, that I'm going to actually navigate over to this global configuration version of that requirement or that test case. It provides that context that does that mapping between a release in Jira to a configuration of assets within the IBM ELM world, and allows you to be able to navigate between those. And you'll see that we're actually having a mapping to a specific GC. I can actually even do a rich hover over that GC, see details about it. And in fact, if I actually went over to this training 2.0 GC, you'll see that we will actually backlink into those releases within Jira itself if we actually look at the links relationship here. So on this training 2.0 GC, you'll see that we actually have a reference to our release from Jira. So this gives us both directions. So we can go ahead and from Jira with that configuration, identify which GC I would operate on as I'm navigating links from Jira. And the inverse is true. If I'm in the IBM GC world and in a particular configuration, we're going to use this link information to be able to identify what releases from Jira are actually relevant, and we'll use that in that discovery process to be able to find my backlinks. So it gives us a little bit of context in terms of how we map between releases and the IBM ELM world, and provides a basis for some of the other discussions that we're going to have when we create a link and use a link. So keep that in mind. You might want to come back here for reference, but that's the basis of when we're working with Jira and working with configurations. The simple concept is, for any given release that I have within Jira, I'm going to want to be able to make sure that I have a configuration that I want to use from the IBM ELM environment. This could be a stream, as these are the case, or it could even be a baseline if you have a past release, so that you can get back to those artifacts. And one last other element here, just kind of a hint to your configuration manager, we do always have the synchronize button here. What this is doing, it's actually going out and being able to make sure that we have consistent references between our Jira releases to our global configurations, and all those global configurations do reference our GC mapping here. So as we navigate between the two worlds, we're consistent. Basic linking with Jira when working with GCs, and what supports we have in there for when you're doing your linking. So first of all, here we just have a simple Jira artifact here, and we want to be able to create a link to DOORS Next. So a couple things to keep in mind. When you want to create your links initially, you're going to go and be able to go to the link prompt, and all these OSLC links are going to happen under collaboration link. Now, one of the things to keep in mind, and this is an example of one of these warnings, is what we did before. We need to be able to map a Jira ticket to a link relationship via a version field.
So this is either the fixed version or effects version. In this case, we're trying to create an implements requirement link, and we're going to be able to identify that you don't have a fixed version assigned, so we don't know what GC to go find an artifact or create an artifact in. So we're giving you a hint here. There's also some more details, some more help that you get clicking on the Here button here. But let's start out and let's work in a actual fixed version. In this case, let's work in release 1. As we mapped that before, that actually goes to release training 1.0, and we'll be able to see that information when we try to create a link again. So let's go ahead and start this link process again, and we'll find out that when we try to create this collaboration link, we're going to be working in this training 1.0 configuration. We can actually even log into GC to be able to get some more hints and tips about that, and we might want to link to an existing requirement. When we do this, we're going to actually get the DOORS Next dialog to be able to go find an artifact that we want to be able to link to. And so if we want to be able to go grab an artifact, I think I had a particular artifact I was looking for. I can use the search parameters if I want to be able to go find an artifact. And I can link to one or multiple artifacts doing multi-select. And then suddenly I have my link shown into DOORS Next. I can do things such as rich hovers to be able to access that. And then we also provide some additional hints and tricks here. You'll see this icon over here. This is like a branching icon or a stream icon. You'll see that will tell you what the current configuration is. So this is a good way to be able, when you're looking at a link, to understand what configuration I might actually be operating in. So that if you aren't familiar with exactly what this fixed version is related to, you'll get that information. You also see a question mark here, so if I want to find out more information about why I did this, and this is really helpful when you start using GC, it will tell you based on this link type, this is the version field we're using, here is the version that it was set to, and here is the GC that we're actually going to uses the context for that link. So this expands out, gives you more hints of how your GC is operating, gives you more full closure of how that happens. Now, when we're working in this realm, and when we see that we're working in Training 1.0, if we go to navigate over to that artifact, you'll see that we'll actually navigate over in that GC. So we have that directionality associated there. You'll also see now that I actually have a link on that artifact back to my original artifact back in Jira, get that rich hover. It gives us some full traceability along this and be able to have access to that. Now, when we're in DOORS Next, we can also be able to operate in a different context in terms of being able to generate those items back into Jira itself. We can do something such as easily as add a link. We're going to go ahead and create a new artifact here because I want to show you an example of a couple things. So let's just create a task here. Simple task. What we'll see here is that automatically set my fixed version field for that link relationship. So we'll see this is actually set appropriately for me. We should see down here it's set to release 1.0. It's using that mapping configuration that we have to be able to understand which fixed version makes sense for this GC that I'm operating in. So it does that helpfully for me. You also see this looks and feels like Jira because it is Jira. So we're using your same creation dialogues from Jira from within DOORS Next. So you have that full experience of being able to create that artifact. So let's go ahead and create that artifact. And you're going to be able to see, there we have it, our simple task that we just created. Back over in Jira, we can actually even see the rich hover back over that immediately. So it gives you a good sense of how that operates. And in fact, the way that these GC operates mean that as I switch different GCs, let's go ahead and switch to back to my training 2.0. Pay attention here into this implementation implemented by column. We're going to see a change that our train 5 and train 10 that we're just working on are no longer going to be in that column because it's going to do that discovery of which of my Jira tickets are actually operating within that global configuration. So if we look at training 2, we have a different set of artifacts that are actually assigned to that. If we do a rich hover on them, we should see a training or release 2.0 in their fixed version here. So these are items that are different than what we had in our release 1 that was related to training 1. Now, the other thing to kind of give you one last take a look at here that I think is interesting to pay attention to is normal actions that we do in Jira that relate to how we interact with global configurations. It's pretty common for us if we have a story or an epic, we might want to change which version we're actually doing this in. And we also would want to be able to point to the right version of requirement. So you can watch this dynamically as we look at this requirement here. When we go ahead and say that instead of working in release 1, I want to work in release 2, you're going to be able to see that this requirement actually updates because it's going to point and refresh based on the new GC that I'm operating in. So when I point to release 2, you'll see that the distance actually goes to 3 meters instead of 6 feet. You'll see the status comes over here and is approved. And if you did look here, you'll see that we're working in training 2.0. That's the nice thing about OSLC is we actually are very dynamic in terms of that information. So as we move to different releases, we'll automatically refresh based on that new context that we're operating in and give you the latest and greatest information. So you don't have to go update the information on your links. Those links navigate in context to that GC. And in fact, now if I go to operate and navigate over to this artifact from within my Jira environment here, it's going to take me over to training 2 and that version of the requirement over in training 2. And you can see that now my implemented by has training 5 in here. And if I went back to training 1 and switch back to training 1, we'll notice that we no longer have that training 5 relationship on that requirement now that we moved it out to the later release. So hopefully that gives you a preview of some of the basic linking. We'll get into some other options here in a moment, but that should get you started. A couple other scenarios and ways in which we can create links from DOORS Next back into Jira so you understand what behaviors to expect. The typical linking that we can do from DOORS Next is either through this browser to be able to pick and say we want to add an implementation link, so that way we can pick a link type directly, and we're going to get a couple different dialogues. The standard dialog or the default dialog that we provide you to be able to search for artifacts is actually a Jira style dialog, meaning that it expects you to be able to know IDs and such to be able to search for artifacts. And so we can go ahead and identify artifacts that we might want to create a link to. We'll have some features in here. It gives you a better idea to be able to make sure you have GC compatibility and be able to make sure that as you go to create and identify these artifacts you might want to link to, you understand whether or not they're in your current GC, like Train 1 is, or they're outside your GC, like Train 3 is, so that we can focus on linking within our GC. So it's a very flexible way, allows you to be able to keep IDs and Jira context with you along the way. It's pretty common for us Jira users to know a specific ID we want to link to. Quick way to be able to find it, and a quick way to be able to give us some identification of we're utilizing the right GC. And we'll see that information here, and we'll see that link that we can add. The other way to be able to add a link is going to be simply using your column view. You're going to get the same type of dialog, and we can go ahead, instead of just using that Jira style, we can use a filter view. And what filter views allow us to be able to do is take a look at convenient ways to be able to find items of different types. And you also still see this filter for things that are actually within your own current GC, so that we can quickly add items, have consistency to them, and you'll get back to the screen, give you additional information that yes, you're like the artifacts you want, and then you can kind of mix and match how you do that selection dialog. So it's a good way to be able to operate and create those links. The one thing that we want to give you some awareness on is some of the caching behavior. You see how these links show up immediately. We talked before about some of the discovery that goes on. It might take a minute for those things to show up. DOORS Next provides a way for it to locally cache that information. When you create a link within a view, it's going to assume that you're actually operating that GC, so we'll temporarily store that information in the cache. You'll see that here if I actually do a misalignment here, meaning if I come in here and I want to choose one of these existing artifacts that don't actually fit within my GC. I think train 3, yeah, this one doesn't actually show up in my GC. So I wouldn't expect to have it show up in this module view here because I'm working in training 1. This item is actually in release 2, I do believe. So when I create that link, it'll be interesting. It'll temporarily show it to me because it's in the cache here, but you'll see here that it's actually targeted for release 2. And so it's some inconsistency that we have here. So you want to be able to pay attention to that. In about 5 or 10 minutes, that cache will empty out, and it will show up appropriately in release 2. And then we can actually pop over to release 2 to show you some other behaviors to be aware of, because our training 2 stream is actually one that we prevent edits on unless we're actually within a change set. So you'll see this blocker that prevents us to be able to create a link on here. You'll also see that train 3 shows up as the artifact that we linked before in that other one. So you want to be able to pay attention to that and have some access to that information and understanding. Even though these items show as being not editable, so we actually have some issues here in terms of we can't make changes on this. Understand that these link information is actually stored within Jira, and it's going to do a discovery here. So if we look at item 890 here, even though I can't edit this module within my current stream, if I came over here and came onto this artifact here and wanted to create a link to that that artifact 890, I could. So if I want to be able to link to an existing requirement, I can select artifact 890 and actually link to that directly. And create that link. It's interesting that I can do that. I can do that directly from within my Jira ticket, and then over a period of time, once that discovery takes place, we'll see that link here. So this link information actually isn't stored on the module itself. It's actually stored in Jira, and this is just a discovery view. It's also the interesting part about why, even though I can't edit these, it is interesting now in this version of DOORS Next. It does allow me to have slight edit, meaning that I can go and remove a link. I just can't add a link. But I can add a link from a remote source like what we just did there. So if we do a refresh here, I would expect, or close to around a minute, we should be able to see that item show up as that link to item 890, and there it is. The same thing goes in here, as I can actually go ahead and remove this link. It's not actually modifying my local resource. That's why it allows me to be able to drag and drop features for creating links in OSLC Connect for Jira. So like we did before, we're going to go ahead and go to the link dialog and collaboration links to create these OSLC links. What you should notice here is this drop dialog, meaning this is a drop pane for us to be able to drop requirements, and then we'll talk a little bit more about pasting URLs here in a minute. But in this case, I can go ahead and come over to my DOORS Next environment, take a link, drag it over to my Jira window, drop it onto this dialog. It's going to go ahead and identify and find out what requirement it is, as well as it's going to do some checking for the GC to be able to make sure that I have a valid GC or consistent GC with where I'm dropping from into what I'm dropping into. And you also see the option, you can go ahead and change the link type if you so desire. And the link types that show up are only the link types that relate to the artifact that you have. And you can go ahead and create a link. It's as simple as that to be able to create links. The nice thing is when we go ahead and create our next link, if I want to drag and drop over here another artifact again, I can, and bring it over to my other window. The nice thing here is I don't even have to start that link dialog. Once I have at least one OSLC link, I can drop it on there. It will assume that it's going to be using that same link type as before, but even if you want to use a different link type, you can go ahead and modify it before you actually finish on the linking activity. And so we can add links that way. It's a great way when you have a larger monitor to be able to just drag and drop multiple artifacts over. That's indeed possible. The one thing that we want to be able to point out to you is there's a couple things that are of interest here. Number one is if you want to create multiple links, you can actually use a feature within DOORS Next to be able to do it. If we actually select a couple of these requirements here, actually let's select a bunch of them. There is an option here to share links of artifacts. So if I have multiple ones selected, I can go ahead and copy that set of URLs. And then when I can come back over into my Jira environment, when I go ahead and do the link, this was what we talked about that pasting ability, is that I can go ahead and paste, either click on that button to paste or just Control V like I just did, and that way you can link to many objects at the same time. All those things, we saw that we're working with release 1 here. We see that we are actually working with training 1 here, so we have a consistent GC because that is what this release is working for, is for that. Now, if on the other hand we want to be able to see that we're going to detect differences of that, let's go ahead and go to this link dialog again, because there's some hints on this when we go to create the collaboration link. It tells us that we're working in training 1. And so that's what it's going to be checked to be able to make sure that we're in a consistent GC. Now, if I happen to have another window open like I do here, I can go ahead and be able to find a requirement here. Let's grab a requirement down a little farther. And I can drag this over to Jira, and I can drop it in here. What we're going to see here is it's going to give us a warning. It's going to let us know that while that requirement does exist in training 1, what you dropped was actually in a different GC. So it allows you to be able to create the link. You'll see the option to be able to create the link, but it may be a different version of that requirement in that GC. We want to point that out to you. In this case, we were dropping from training 2 into a training 1 relationship. The more common scenario is you might be working in a personal stream and dropping that over. We want you to be aware of that. What we will be more authoritative about is when you create or try to create a link to an artifact that doesn't exist. So I have a requirement here that only exists in release 2. If I take this requirement, drag it over here to be able to create a link, drop it over here, you'll see a little bit different explanation. So this tells me that requirement doesn't actually exist in that GC, and so it's not a valid configuration for me to create, so it won't allow me to be able to link. So there's just some simple abilities in there to be able to make it a little bit easier to be able to use drag and drop. Try to be able to make sure you stay consistent with your GCs. Give you warnings when there's some things that might be slightly inconsistent that you should be aware of, and definitely prevent you from making relationships to requirements that don't exist in the GC that you're pointing to prevent you from having broken links. So hopefully that helps you understand the drag and drop features and take advantage of it when you have a large screen or a large monitor to be able to create many different links. Let's take a quick look at change sets and their behavior with Jira. So in this case, we have some configurations going on that says that on this local stream we can't make any changes unless we have a change set. That's kind of some process controls to be able to make sure that we're doing the right thing and being able to make sure that we've done and reviewed changes before they're delivered back to the main stream. So let's go ahead and create a change set. Change set. And what this will do is it will switch me to my own personal stream, my configuration for that, and as well as allow me to be able to make some interesting relationships. Um, so in this case, not only can I go ahead and um, create relationships to this change set that's here, I also can link to a work item. This is going to be important in certain scenarios. You can see if I do a change here, let's go ahead and edit our artifact here. I think this stream is set up for me to have a mandatory requirement to have a change set. In this case also probably a approved change set. Because if I try to deliver this change set back to my main stream, change set must be linked to an approved change request. That change request doesn't have to be an EWM. In this case, we can actually do it within Jira itself. And the way we do that, we can link to a work item and be able to, let's go ahead and just create a new artifact here. It's just easier for us to do sample, approval, change. So we can see we're just going to create a task here within Jira and be able to have that link to that artifact. Now the nice thing here is what we're going to see here is that we have a link to a work item now. If I actually open up that in a new tab, you'll be able to see that this artifact within Jira now tracks a change set. Let's get authenticated back to DOORS Next. In that change set even, I can navigate over to that change set and I can see actually which changes are actually performed. So we can see those change resources. You'll be able to see the change that I actually made, which was just simply a change in description. And that's all that happened. And this allows us to be able to go ahead and look from this Jira item to see what changes are done. The other thing to keep in mind, much like everything else, those links are actually stored in Jira. They're not actually stored within DOORS Next. Behind the scenes, this is a little bit different than what goes on with most of our links in DOORS Next. DOORS Next is using LDX to be able to resolve the links. In this case, it's using what's called OSLC query, so DOORS Next is talking directly to Jira to be able to have this link. So whenever you load up this change set, it might take a second or two for it to resolve whether those links. You'll see a quick flash there before it does. That's that OSLC query that's going out to be able to find that artifact. It's basically asking Jira, based on this change set, does anybody have a link to me? And that's how it resolves any links that are here. Now, within DOORS Next now, we talked about before, is we couldn't deliver that change until we actually had change set, a related Jira artifact, and then actually we try to deliver change. We should see a warning here that we're actually not in approved state yet. The approval rules that we have right now are just simple ones in this configuration, which is actually to only have these things to be done. So you could have some additional rules that you define in your configuration with OSLC Connect for Jira to be able to have some JQL statement that says you have approvals or approvers or a certain number of votes to be able to say that this has been approved. But it says that you need to actually make a change within Jira that identifies that this item has been approved. In this case, we've now approved it because we moved it to a done state. So now when I come back into here, I should be able to go ahead and say deliver a change set. It's going to validate that I have an approved work item attached to that change set, and then I will kick off the procedure to be able to deliver that change back into the mainstream. So pretty simple process. The nice thing is then we have a whole set of traceability relationships back to those changes. You'll see back within Jira itself, we should be able to see some notification here that that change set's actually now been delivered. We see that delivered, and we could be able to navigate over to see the contents of that delivery and what's been actually delivered to that stream and which stream. So it gives you a full set of traceability using Jira, having some approvals associated with that, so you can have a formal process with Jira, with DOORS Next, to be able to manage your requirements. So we'll do a quick tangent here on how link discovery actually takes place. I'll give you a little background on it, not because you need to be experts, but I think it's valuable to be able to understand what's happening behind the scenes. So from an OSLC Connect for Jira perspective, we're providing what's called a tracked resource set.
think of this as just a running list of things that have been changed, when they've been created, when they've been deleted, when they've been updated. It's a notification service to IBM ELM. And so IBM ELM has an application called our link index provider, LDX. It's actually monitoring for these changes. And when it sees one of these changes, it updates the information it has stored about the links of this. And this is why you might see a delay on a link showing up in DNG that you created from Jira. It's because it's doing this discovery and this monitoring of this TRS feed that happens basically on every minute or so. And you can see that here, and these are the list of changes. You see something 312, 313, 314, 315. And on these, you actually have details about how many resources it processed, how many details it took place, how many artifacts were in there. In this case, we see my test environment that I've been just doing some basic changes on. And so if I went to go into my artifacts in Jira, we can go ahead and, if we want to, add a new link, and we'll be able to see that delay of that artifact showing up until we've actually processed that artifact within that link index provider. So let's go ahead and create a link to an artifact. And so I can show you a little bit about what happens instantly and then what happens once our link data index updates and how we can actually see that artifact. So in this case, I can make a link to just any artifact here. Let's go ahead and do it to item 1056 and create that link. If I navigate over to that artifact immediately, then we're going to see that artifact. And it might have a link to an artifact, but it's most likely just going to be a link to an artifact that already existed prior before. So you see it has a link to train 3. We actually made it a link from train 5 here. So there's a delay in seeing that information. And the delay in seeing that information is actually because our link index has not actually updated that yet. So we can go ahead and be able to see if I refresh this, see when it's actually done the last update. It's done that last update now. Process one resource. I assume it's actually train 5 that it just processed. If I come back over to DNG, I should be able to actually refresh this and see on 1056 now that I should have a link to train 5 as well. And there it is. And so this is actually something that we need to pay attention to. We're going to probably see about a 1 minute delay, anywhere between 1 second to 60 seconds delay in terms of when we see those links show up. For the most part, they're going to appear instantaneously to the user, but it's that delay, that index update, that's causing that period of time before it happens. It happens when we switch in between a different release or anything else, any other change that we create to that link relationship. It's going to have that index delay associated with it. And so you want to be able to pay attention to that. The same thing's true if I went ahead and went to that link data source and I went ahead and paused the data source. So if I actually take a look at this data source here, I should be able to actually update it here. I can actually pause indexing of that data source. That means anytime that I make any of these changes at all, I can delete any of these items. I think 1056 was the item that I just created a relationship to. What's going to happen is I'm never going to get an update to this item until that pause is stopped. So until I can refresh this as many as I want, I can wait 5 minutes, I'm still going to see that artifact there because I paused updating that index. If I want to actually see that index show up again or see that artifact addressed, I can come back in here, look at this artifact, and I can say resume indexing. And it's going to go ahead and we should be able to see it refresh up there. And it just processed a new data source. So if I go back over here, we should see train 5 go away just immediately as that took place. So having that index being paused means that we're going to see a delay in any of those changes, whether it's add, deletes, removes, whatever. So That's behind the scene what's going on. So as you are creating links, removing links, expect to see a small delay. That delay takes place to how we visualize things in Doors Next. It's how we report on those items. It's just a natural part of what takes place within the IBM ELM environment when it's creating those discoveries of backlinks. And happens with whether it's Doors Next or Quality Manager, EWM as well. It's just a foundation behind the scenes. If you have questions of links aren't showing up or they're not updating the way you expect, that might be a question to the ELM admin for them to be able to check, to be able to make sure the index is updating properly, and be able to help you navigate those questions of why you aren't seeing links available. And that's why it's helpful to be able to understand that underlying all this is this link index provider. More thing relative to GCs and linking and deleting as we operate. One of the interesting parts and one of the things that are actually happen rather commonly from a Jira perspective is situations where maybe I don't have one release, but I actually have maybe two releases that I'm targeting. Or it could be a maintenance release and a mainline release. I might be tracking the same thing on a particular Jira issue or Jira item. Couple things to keep in mind here. It's entirely valid for us to be able to do that. What we're going to go ahead and do is be able to report to the IBM ELM environment that this issue is actually related to two different deliverables, two different releases. And we can be able to see that on the ELM side of both of those releases. Now, the other interesting part is here, we have to be deterministic in terms of which release we're actually supporting here. So in this case, we'll see here and see this hover here. We'll say that we're actually pointing at training 2. It's usually the last version that we're on here as being selected as the primary. It's all due to the ordering that you have in your releases within Jira. So depending on your priority and your ordering within Jira, that's how it's actually going to show up. But in this case, we're always going to navigate to release 2. But if I actually take a look at this item over within the Doors Next environment, we should be able to at least navigate over there into release 2, and we'll see that link of that artifact. So there's train 1. If I switch over to training 1, the other release that it's related to, we should also still be able to see that train 1 relationship on there, and you'll see it there. So you can see that we can actually participate in multiple configurations from Jira on that artifact. And so this was kind of the hint of where I was saying it's important to understand from a deletion standpoint, because so in this case, if I look at this artifact within Jira, you can see that I have a link to one artifact from within the environment within Doors Next. And if I came over here and did a delete, say if I say, well, actually this shouldn't be in training 1 and did a delete here, it will actually delete in both releases because it's actually deleting the link information. If you wanted to only remove it from that one release, then this issue item needs to have that release 1 removed, because otherwise if I do this deletion here and go ahead and say remove this link here, it's going to actually delete that over in Jira. And so if I did a refresh here, it just is going to flat out delete that link. This is where you have to be careful. If you delete it in one release, you delete it in all releases. And if we come back over and we take a look at training 2, when it does that update, that periodic update for identifying when an artifact should be indexed, which is usually about once a minute, we'll see that we'll find that training 1, probably about 30 seconds or so, is going to actually be removed from this list because I deleted it completely. So as that index operates, it's going to periodically update. It's usually set for about 60 seconds. It will identify that now that artifact is actually removed from both links. And so if we do a refresh on this, we should be able to see train 1 go away because my link to that should be all set and gone. So yeah, I deleted it on one GC within DOORS Next, and it deleted it in both. So take special care when you're doing delete. You're deleting the link. You're not deleting the link in the context of a specific GC.
Session on global configurations. Well, not part of OSLC Connect for Jira. The way in which GCs are managed within the IBM tools is important for you to understand some of the possibilities as well as the impacts as you're operating with Jira and tools like DOORS Next. So let's take a look here. We're looking at a training 2.0 configuration for the global configuration in DOORS. You can see some links in here, just a few basic ones. It looks like to train 3, which happens to be, if we do a rich hover, we'll see that being in release 2.0, which is actually what we expect. Now, if we take a look at this global configuration, we can see some definitions in here that are important. Let's actually go and open a new tab. Let's take a look at this global configuration. What we need to pay attention to here is links. Now, when we go ahead and create that relationship in Jira to the global configuration application and map a release to a GC, we do automatically update this link section to be able to say which release in Jira is related to that GC. However, your GC manager can make changes, make updates to that information. That's why we have the synchronization function, but the synchronization function is just making sure that we have that release in here. It doesn't preclude you from adding additional releases, and this might make sense. So if I go in here, I can go ahead and add a link to another release. So let's go ahead and pretend maybe that I want to include my other release from that project, release 1. So I get a dialog that allows me to pick any of the releases that I have over in my Jira project to be able to include in here. We have some filters. We can be able to search and sort them out. What this does, this now tells the GC application is, as I'm looking at training 2.0, I want to include work item links to release 2.0 as well as release 1.0. It gives me the ability to be able to add multiple releases in there. Now, it might make more sense as we're doing maybe a product line engineering project where I might have layers of projects or layers of releases that might be going on at the same time. Or I might have some sort of release schedule that has like a maintenance release and a planned future release, and I want to see both of those sets of links at the same time so I understand what's future work, what's maintenance work, and be able to see that in my DOORS Next environment. But you need to pay attention to that. You need to understand, well, it made sense that release 2 was in training 2.0. That isn't the only definition, so you might want to pay attention to what's actually in there. Now, if I look back at my project itself, and I do a refresh, what I should see here is not just the artifacts in release 2, that train 3 item, but we should see some of those release 1 items as well. And so we'll see that. So if I look in here, I can actually see train 5 is actually scheduled for release 1. Now there's lots of different possibilities you can do with this, but it does give you a sense of all the abilities that you have to be able to kind of mix and match and manage your GCs to give teams more capability to include other content within DOORS Next as you're looking at it so that people can see that. Now, the other part about that, not only can we maintain those GCs, we also need to understand how our personal GC operates. So in the case of doing something like creating a change set, let's do sample change set. And what this will do is actually create a change set, but it'll switch me to my own personal stream. And so let's see what contents we get in that personal stream. So when I switch over to this personal stream, I'm going to see contents related to this. In this case, I can actually take a look at what's in my personal stream and load that up, open a new tab. And we're going to see some similar contents here. In this case, I've modified this to be able to include multiple links as well. This is something that you have the ability to be able to do and be able to add content in here. The one thing to keep in mind is that your personal stream will actually contain the links from when it was first created. So if we created this from a GC that only had release 2 in it, then that would be release 2. It would be up to you to manage the changes and SKUs to that. So keep in mind what the GC manager is doing with that main stream that you're operating on, and work on how you want to manage your own personal stream to include different releases from Jira in it so that you have visibility to that other content. So things like being able to decide that, well, actually I only want to see release 1 items, or you might indicate and say, I actually don't want to see any contents whatsoever. I could actually remove all my releases from my own personal stream. Doesn't affect the main global configuration at all, and it just keeps you from making changes to those Jira items that you might not want to make changes to. And so as you make those changes, you'll be able to see back in your project itself to be able to see those changes and those updates. While we've focused most of our demonstration of GC linking with DOORS Next, we do want to reference that it does work with other applications as well. Same concept. If we look at a test case here in ETM, we'll see that we're operating in a GC as well. If we go ahead and run a test case, we're going to get the same type of behavior as we saw both in just the generic linking, but also within the GC context. So if we get to a failed step within our execution of our test case, we can go ahead and create a new defect. It's going to create that connection with Jira. We're automatically going to file a bug. You'll also see that we automatically set the effects version to the training 2.0 configuration. So when we generate this defect will be generated with that reference to the 2.0. And so if I go ahead and take a look at this artifact, open it up in Jira, you'll be able to see that we set the effects version to 2.0. It means that if I look at these links to the affected requirements, they're actually to 2.0. The same goes for these test results. After we log into ETM, we'll get an update of that information. We'll see that we have that information as well, and it points actually back to that 2.0 reference. So we have that integration, that configuration. You'll also see that these links, seeing they're looking at a past version, are using actually the effects version field rather than the fixed version field. Gives you a sense of how we operate with GCs and how links can use different version fields as well. User training session on using GCs with Jira. Hopefully it provides a foundation to understand how GCs operate with our Jira issues and how to be able to best leverage that within your process. If you have any questions, by all means, please reach out to your admins. If there's further questions that you have with the Sodius Willard team, please engage your help desk. We're happy to be able to collaborate, to be able to make sure you get the most out of your OSLC Connect for Jira tools. Thank you very much.